across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. Joining me today from Washington, D.C. is my colleague, Kate Fisher. Hi, Kate.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 10 a.m. here in Washington, D.C., and it's 4 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll have all the latest of the meeting between French President Emmanuel Macron and Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, and we'll have the latest from the war zone in Israel. And I'll also have more on the ongoing look for a Speaker of the House here in Washington. Right now, though, it's back to you in the studio for the headlines.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets French President Emmanuel Macron in Jerusalem, warns that Europe will be endangered if Hamas wins.
If Hamas loses and is defeated, then the forces of civilization win. That is why this battle is not merely our own.
French President Emmanuel Macron proposes an international coalition fighting against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria to be widened to include the Palestinian militant group Hamas in Gaza. UN organizations plead for unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza on their knees. And US President Joe Biden says no ceasefire in Gaza until all the hostages are released by Hamas. French President Emmanuel Macron held talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem today. Macron said that France and Israel share terrorism as their common enemy. He also proposed that the existing anti-Islamic State coalition can be widened to fight Hamas in Gaza. The French president added that the West Asia's stability will only be possible if Israel also allows for political approach to the conflict with the Palestinians, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Europe will be endangered if Hamas wins.
This is why France is prepared for the international coalition against Islamic State, within which we are engaged for our operation in Iraq and Syria, to also be able to fight against Hamas. I proposed to our international partners, I discussed that we can build a regional and international coalition to fight against the terrorist group that threaten us all.
Hamas must be destroyed. The test for the West and for civilization is Hamas. If Hamas emerges victorious, we will all lose. Europe will be endangered. Everyone will be endangered. Civilization will be endangered. So if Hamas wins, if Hamas loses and is defeated, then the forces of civilization win. That is why this battle is not merely our own. It's Europe's battle, it's America's battle, it's civilization's battle. It's the battle for the heart and soul and the future of the Middle East and the Arab world.
The French president earlier met with the families of the kidnapped Israeli citizens who also hold French citizenship. Macron also called on with Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz after meeting Israeli President Isaac Herzog. Macron told Herzog that France stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel and that the first objective should be to free all hostages in Gaza. US President Joe Biden, too, has underscored the need to sustain a continuous flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza in call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday. My colleague Kate Fisher is in Washington, D.C. She gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Kate, over to you now.
Thanks, Tanvi. Yes, that's right. During the call, he also reiterated his commitment to getting all the hostages out of Gaza, saying that he wanted to see safe passage for all Americans and Gaza civilians that needed to get out of there. And he also talked about increasing regional deterrence and the potential for fresh military deployments from the US to that end. So it was a busy phone call, and the conflict continues in Gaza. We now have a total of 7,200 people who have been killed across both sides in this conflict, and over 20,000 injured since it began on October the 7th. So it's really getting increasingly worse in the area. As the war rages on, DD India's Amrit Pal has the latest on the ground.
Israel has stepped up its military campaign against Hamas. Last night, it pounded missiles and aerial bombs into the Gaza Strip. If Hamas are to be believed, 140 people died in last night alone in the airstrikes by Israel. Many hundreds are injured. Israel is making no qualms about it. It says it is stepping up its military campaign and will not stop until Hamas is totally decimated. In fact, the defense minister of Israel this morning said that they will attack Hamas via sea, land and air. While all this is on, Western leaders are continuously pouring in to Tel Aviv to try and tell Benjamin Netanyahu that they should not go in for a ground assault, which is imminent. Because if they do so, the civilian count would further go up. It may spiral and become a regional conflict. The Western countries do not want another full-fledged war after the Ukraine-Russia war, especially in the Middle East, given that it's the energy hub of the world. Also, there is this question of hostages. 4 hostages have been released so far. 2 Americans were released earlier. Yesterday, 2 Israeli old women were released by the Hamas. But they still hold more than 200 people captive. The Western countries are pressing upon Benjamin Netanyahu to not go in for a ground assault lest the Hamas starts killing those hostages, which has nationals from the Western countries. They want more time to negotiate the release of those hostages. But Benjamin Netanyahu is under increasing pressure from the public sentiment to send his troops in. So he has a tight political rope to walk here. With cameraman SP Dubey, this is Amrit Pal Singh for DD India in Jerusalem.
Yocheved Lifshitz, who's 85, was one of 2 women freed late on Monday, leaving around 220 hostages still in the hands of Hamas. Once in Gaza, she said that her captors took her into tunnels that she compared to a spider's web, and she said they treated her well. DD India's Abhishek Bose reports.
These are the posters of the missing Israelis, believed to be kidnapped by Hamas. Daniel Lifshitz has got some respite as his 85-year-old grandmother is one of the 2 elderly women who have been freed by Hamas on health grounds. The 2 women were transferred to ambulances at Rafah crossing from Gaza to Egypt. They were handed over to the Israeli military and flown to Tel Aviv for medical examination.
My mom is telling the horrific stories. She's saying that many people, a swarm of people, came through the fence. The defense cost 2.5 billion shekels, and it didn't help even a little bit. My mom is saying that she was taken on the back of a motorbike with her body, with her legs on one side and her head on another side, that she was taken through the plowed fields with a man in front on one side and a man behind her, and that while she was being taken, she was hit by sticks by Shabab. Yeah, Shabab people. Until they reached the tunnels.
Although the women were freed, their husbands are still under captivity. Over 200 people are still held hostage by Hamas. The families of them are hoping for their release. Meanwhile, trucks carrying relief material for Gaza have piled up in Rafah border, the main crossing point between Egypt and Gaza that doesn't border with Israel. Even as the third convoy of humanitarian aid trucks carrying water, food and medicine reached Gaza on Monday. The movement of trucks through Rafah started on Saturday after days of negotiations. But it's not enough for the thousands of survivors still waiting for more food and water. As Gaza is also running out of fuel, the United Nations has warned that hospitals in the enclave will stop functioning. 18 days have passed. The Israel-Hamas conflict has plunged West Asia into a major humanitarian crisis. Abhishek Bose for DD India.
A deepening humanitarian crisis has cast a shadow on the lives of countless civilians in Gaza. A relentless cycle of violence which has persisted for generations shows no sign of abating, leaving in its wake a trail of sorrow and suffering. Take a look at this report.
As Israel-Gaza conflict continues, death toll is rising. Innocent men, women and children are experiencing unimaginable horrors. Homes have been reduced to rubble and families torn apart as the region plunges deeper into chaos.
We don't want aid. We want to return to our homes. Enough, we don't have patience anymore. We are drained. We don't feel human anymore.
The conflict has led to a staggering loss of life, with casualties mounting daily. Hospitals and medical facilities already strained struggle to cope with the influx of patients, leaving many without access to vital medical care.
Medical resources in the hospital have completely run out. We urgently hope that the medical supplies can arrive as soon as possible, that fuel can be brought in, and the sick and wounded can be evacuated urgently outside the Gaza Strip.
The children are often the most vulnerable. The trauma they endure, the disruption of their education, and the loss of loved ones cast long shadows over their lives, robbing them of their childhood innocence.
I went to look for my mother, my father, and my siblings. God bless their soul. I felt heartbroken. It was like a nightmare. I had a 16-year-old sister among the dead, and they wrote my name on her coffin, since they thought it was me.
A new convoy of 20 trucks carrying humanitarian aid reached the war-torn Gaza Strip from Egypt's Rafah border, crossing on Monday. Humanitarian organizations are working tirelessly to provide assistance to those affected. But the perilous conditions and limited access pose daunting challenges.
Before the crisis, we understand that approximately 465 trucks a day were needed to support the population in Gaza. We're seeing at best 20 trucks a day at the moment. And so with that kind of limitation...
Well, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is talking now. Let's cross and hear what he's saying.
We must demand that all parties uphold and respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Take constant care in the conduct of military operations to spare civilians, and respect and protect hospitals, and respect the inviolability of UN facilities, which today are sheltering more than 600,000 Palestinians. The relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces, the level of civilian casualties, and the wholesale destruction of neighborhoods continue to mount and are deeply alarming. I mourn and honor dozens of UN colleagues working for UNRWA. Sadly, at least 35 and counting, killed in the bombardment of Gaza over the last 2 weeks. I owe to their families my condemnation of these and many other similar killings. The protection of civilians is paramount in any armed conflict. Protecting civilians can never mean using them as human shields. Protecting civilians does not mean ordering more than 1 million people to evacuate to the south, where there is no shelter, no food, no water, no medicine, and no fuel, and then continuing to bomb the south itself. I'm deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. Excellencies, thankfully some humanitarian relief is finally getting into Gaza, but it is a drop of aid in an ocean of need. In addition, our UN fuel supplies in Gaza will run out in a matter of days, and that would be another disaster. Without fuel, aid cannot be delivered, hospitals will not have power, and drinking water cannot be purified or even pumped. The people of Gaza need continuous aid delivery at a level that corresponds to the enormous needs. And that aid must be delivered without restrictions. I salute our UN colleagues and humanitarian partners in Gaza working under hazardous conditions and risking their lives to provide aid to those in need. They are an inspiration. To ease epic suffering, make the delivery of aid easier and safer, and facilitate the release of hostages, I reiterate my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Excellencies, even in this moment of grave and immediate danger, we cannot lose sight of the only realistic foundation for a true peace and stability, a two-state solution. Israelis must see their legitimate needs for security materialized, and Palestinians must see their legitimate aspirations for an independent state realized in line with the United Nations resolution, international laws, and previous agreements. And finally, we must be clear on the principle of upholding human dignity. Polarization and dehumanization are being fueled by a tsunami of disinformation. We must stand up to the forces of anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, and all forms of hate. Mr. President, Excellencies, today is United Nations Day, marking 78 years since the UN Charter entered into force. That Charter reflects our shared commitment to advance peace, sustainable development, and human rights. On this UN Day, at this critical hour, I appeal to all to pull back from the brink before the violence claims even more lives and spreads even further. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing.
Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, speaking there about the ongoing conflict in Gaza and Israel. He said that although some aid has got into Gaza, he's called it a drop of aid in an ocean of need, and he called for, once again, for a humanitarian ceasefire there. Well, here in the US, President Joe Biden has said that he will not consider backing a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war until all of the hostages kidnapped by Hamas are returned safely. And he told reporters, and I quote, that we should have those hostages released and then we can talk. He was talking about the potential of a ceasefire in exchange for Hamas releasing approximately 200 hostages, including Americans, that are still believed to be being held in the Gaza Strip. Well, here in Washington, Republicans in the House of Representatives are planning to vote again on Tuesday to move forward elections for a new Speaker of the House. The Republican Party is trying to agree on a nominee, a third since October the 3rd, after previous candidates couldn't get enough votes. Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
It's been more than 3 weeks since the last Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, was ousted from the role by members of his own Republican Party. They're trying to reach consensus on who they should nominate for the next House Speaker and are likely to hold a secret ballot on it on Tuesday. There are currently 9 new candidates going for the role after Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan couldn't get enough backing. The frontrunner is House Majority Whip Tom Emmer from Minnesota. Some in the House would like to allow acting House Speaker Patrick McHenry to bring bills to the floor. Without that power or a new House Speaker, representatives can't vote on normal business. That means a pause on approving funding for Israel or Ukraine, or on new spending packages, which have to be decided on to avert a government shutdown on November 17th. Caroline Malone in Washington for DD India.
Well, with that, that's all from me here in Washington. Over back to you, Tanvi, in New Delhi.
Thank you. Kate Fisher joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. on DD India Global. Still to come on the show. On 78th United Nations Day, Indian Foreign Minister says a more purposeful United Nations will deliver on the Global South's expectations and aspirations. And India comes alive with the spirit of the Dussehra festivities. Indian President and Prime Minister attend the celebrations in New Delhi.
We are taking up China's gigantic Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, which has completed 10 years in existence and is undergoing a major metamorphosis.
So definitely, I do feel that China has been using the Belt and Road Initiative as a weapon. So it's also a form of economic coercion, if we could call it. There are countries that are looking for cheap infrastructure. Initially, they actually think that this is infrastructure, this is money without no strings attached. But is it really? We have been seeing at least since 2017, 2018 that countries are realizing that this is just not very feasible for us. We are actually moving towards economic collapse.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global and I'm Tanvi Taneja. The festival of Vijayadashmi or Dussehra is being celebrated across India today. Indian President Draupadi Murmu wished the entire nation on the occasion. She also attended the Ram Leela at the Red Fort grounds in New Delhi. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also participated in the Dussehra celebrations in Dwarka area of the national capital New Delhi on the occasion of Vijayadashmi. Dussehra, that's an annual Indian festival that celebrates the triumph of good over evil. PM Modi attended the Ravan Dahan ceremony in the Ram Leela ground in Delhi. He also performed a puja and witnessed the burning of the effigy of Ravana. Earlier in the day, Prime Minister extended his wishes to the nation on the auspicious occasion of Dussehra. 78 years ago, the United Nations was created on this day to maintain international peace and security among the warring nations. But the complex geopolitical realities of the 21st century have reduced it to an obsolete forum for global peacekeeping and cooperation. DD India's Jessica Taneja reports.
The Conference of the United Nations on International Organization is now convened.
October 24, 1945. A global war just ended. Some colonial powers that still controlled Asia and Africa created the United Nations to serve the interests of 193 countries.
Lasting peace.
Its permanent members, the US, Britain, France, Russia, China, or the P5, victors of a contentious world war, gave themselves the power to impose sanctions and authorize military interventions. The job was to maintain international peace. And yet, 78 years after its inception, 91 countries are still involved in some kind of conflict. War has caused a 13% loss of global GDP.
In the box next to the name printed on the ballot.
While the UN may seem faulty, geopolitical gridlocks haven't affected aid programs aimed at feeding hungry people or vaccinating children. Even the peacekeeping missions have been successful so far. Over the years, it's tried hard to become a useful and meaningful counterbalance to America's approach, only to be defeated by heightened geopolitical rivalry.
Our world is becoming unhinged. Geopolitical tensions are rising. Global challenges are mounting. And we seem incapable of coming together to respond.
Furthermore, many nations, including India, feel that UN agencies should be more democratic and representative of current realities.
It is still
a few nations who shape the agenda and seek to define the norms. This cannot go on indefinitely, nor will it go unchallenged. A fair, equitable, and democratic order will surely emerge once we all put our minds to it. And for a start, that means ensuring that rule makers do not subjugate rule takers.
But the UN still battles the image of a glorified gapfest, and its systems continue to be out of date when dealing with complex geopolitical realities of the 21st century. Jessica Taneja for DD India.
And on the 78th anniversary of the United Nations, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar took to his social media account and said, and I quote him here, "On 78th UN Day, I reaffirm India's commitment to the United Nations and its charter, emphasize the significance of reformed multilateralism, which fosters fairness, inclusivity and multipolarity. A more purposeful United Nations will deliver on the Global South's expectations and aspirations," Dr. S. Jaishankar wrote on X. And the 5-day-long celebration of Durga Puja concluded in Bangladesh on Tuesday with the immersion of the ideals of Goddess Durga. The traditional Bijoy Dashmi procession held in Dhaka and other cities of Bangladesh. Idols of Goddess Durga were taken in colourful procession for immersion in the rivers and water bodies there. On the way to the immersion place, the devotees chanted the name of Goddess Durga, sang praises in her honour, blew the shells and made these sounds of festivities. That's all in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.